Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual chapter for what month is this? Oh my God, it's August.
August.
August 2022. We're going to have some exciting stuff tonight. We're going to talk about regression and reimprinting and past lives and ab reactions and just everything under the sun. So it's going to be an exciting conversation that we're looking forward to sharing with you. Any particular announcements that you have to make, Karen?
One of the things I would like to say is we like to keep this kind of new and fresh and try different things and make it something different for you guys all the time. And I think we want to try something a little bit different tonight in that we would love for you to ask questions, to be engaged, to share things with us, and to really do this along with us. The more we all know and the more we all share, the more we all get better. So as we're talking about regression and re-imprinting and all of that, if you've had experiences, share those with us. That's what we want to do tonight, is talk about it. Any particular announcements? I know, Michael, you have a certification class coming up. I have a certification class coming up in the Midwest. So East Coast, Midwest, wherever you want to do that kind of thing. Yours is coming up in September?
Yep, I'm actually looking right now. Mine is coming up in September. The first weekend is the 17th and 18th. And my class is arranged sort of for two different groups of people. Basically, you can take it as somebody who, I've talked to a whole lot of hypnotists who don't feel as confident as they'd like to be after their original training. So we put together a training that people could take as a review or a refresh, et cetera, and then added some extra work and extra modules to it for people that are brand new so that they can get the whole training curriculum as well. So for people who've never done hypnosis before and want to get certified, or for people who are already there and just want to maybe get a new perspective and some, God knows I've got some different ways to talk about things than you might have heard from your original teacher. So I'm sort of the philosophy that you ought to learn from as many people as you can. Which is why I would also encourage you to listen very closely to what Karen Handa has to tell you now about the class coming up in Chicago.
After you take Michael's course, you could join me in Chicago to take my certification course. And now I will be honest with you. Mine is really a certification course, so I won't have necessarily all brand new people, but there will be a lot of new people. I do teach a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists, and they expand their skills and they bring so much more to the class too, because they share their skills with us. Mine is unique in that it includes two hypnosis conferences. It starts in Chicago with two full days with me where we do learn how to hypnotize somebody. And then my group attends the Mid-America Hypnosis Conference, which is really one of the friendliest in the country. It's non-denominational, non-affiliated. So my students attend that 3-day conference with the sole purpose, I assign them people to attend, with the purpose of seeing that there are all sorts of ways to do hypnosis, all sorts of styles, direct, permissive, all sorts of ways to do it. And they can begin to formulate the idea that there are many ways to get there, and they can be the kind of hypnotist that they most resonate with. That is the whole point. Then in between, we do Zoom training. So they're also learning how to do hypnosis online. We do Zoom trainings for 12 weeks in between October and the end of February. Then we meet again in Orlando in March 1st for graduation day, and then the ICBCH conference in Orlando in March. And at that point, my students are in the community, and now they're attending a conference as hypnotists. So they'll have a little bit different perspective. And again, they're expanding their skills and going into it with a perspective of what they might want to specialize in or niche into. By the way, I call it niche because it rhymes with rich. And I modeled Jason Lynette. So anyway, that's what my certification is about. That's a longer certification, I think, and a kind of a bigger time commitment. I certify for IACT and a couple of other organizations as well.
And mine is a 4-month deal, by the way, as well. So,
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. I misunderstood.
yeah, no, 4 months. It'll be a while. So by the way, I say niche because it rhymes with riche, actually.
There are all kinds of ways to say it. They're all right.
That's just so French and classy. So what should we tell them about HypnoThoughts?
Well, let me just sneak this in real quick. By the way, you can get CEUs for this if we didn't mention that. Just to go to your IACT forum, your IACT account, or your friendly hypnosis association, and they will give you continuing education credits for joining us tonight. So, HypnoThoughts. Michael and I were there, and we've got some people here who were also, Carrie was there. I thought it was a great time. I think it's just about back to its pre pandemic glory. What do you think, Michael?
Well, now that everybody went home with COVID.
Now that everybody what?
Now
Oh,
that
went home with
everybody
COVID.
went home
Well,
with
I
COVID.
did not, and you did not.
And that's right. That's right. Because I don't believe in it, actually. That's what it is. I refuse. I just don't breathe when I'm in places like that. And that keeps me safe. But yeah, I think it was great, and it does look like it's coming back. You're talking about the classes that we're doing. I was a little curious when I first put it out there because my class is a hybrid. It's online and live as well, for people that are able to do it here, and it's almost filled up with local people, which really surprised me because I thought we've made this transition to doing everything online. And I'm hoping that it all comes back to the way that we the way that we remember it, because there's nothing I like better than having students that I can actually like smack and shake if they need it, and you can't really do that online. So let's keep our fingers crossed, because to me, there's not, I mean, look, we've done great work online, and we have demonstrated that it can be done. But I'm a people guy, I really love to be in the same place with other human beings. So let's keep hoping. But so HypnoThoughts, what was your favorite, what was your favorite thing? What about the conference? What do you like about HypnoThoughts?
It is getting together with people from all over the world. I would love to say that I attended one specific event and just it was life changing, but I'll be honest with you. I had a table this time. I've had my books on other people's tables before, but this time I had a table and I felt tethered. I
Yeah.
felt like I had to be there. It was a place that people could find me. So when I taught a class, I'd say, if you have questions, come over to my table. That was nice. But I felt tethered and I didn't feel free to attend and go around and just be a participant.
Yeah.
So, lesson learned.
Yeah.
Lesson learned.
Yeah.
Lots of people did it different this year, and if you're going to do a conference and you're going to get a table, you might consider this. A lot of people had QR codes that they left out on the table, and if you needed information or wanted information, you just went over and you took their QR code and got all the relevant information. And then when they were there, you got to talk to them. But there were ways to buy books, etc. I'll never travel with as many books as I traveled with this time ever again.
And if you put that QR code on your handout, you can give it out when you do your presentation, and you don't even need a table.
That is exactly right. That is
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
It was a fun experience. It was a good experience, but it's one I'll think about long and hard about again.
Oh, this modern world. And it all started out with walkie-talkies, as we were saying earlier.
That's right.
Smoke signals first, but
Well, what was your favorite thing, Michael?
probably the bowling.
Lying. Don't believe him.
There was the bowling, and there was the 80s party, and there was all kinds of good food. But for me, it is that. I think you highlighted it as well, as there were a lot of great presentations. But I have learned so much more in my career in hypnosis, in the hallways at places like that, and over a glass of wine in the evening, or out to dinner with some people, or whatever it is. So if you get a bunch of people together, I'm really trying to get the answers to my real questions, and I just have a great time being with that many people that are inspired and excited, and it's I think a very renewing thing as well. So
I want to give a big shout out to Kaz Riley. She was the keynote speaker and just did a beautiful job. I went because I love Kaz and I'm a big supporter, but I also wanted to steal from her because I'm the keynote at the Mid-America Conference. And I thought, okay, I want to get some ideas. Oh, I only hope that I can live up to this tremendous job that she did. It was just a stunning keynote.
I know you can, and I'm sure you can do that.
I'm hoping I can live up to that. We'll see.
gonna-
Fingers
you're,
crossed.
you're gonna
Come
shine.
on to Mid America and find out in person if you've got
Yeah.
the opportunity. Third weekend in October.
Yeah. So by the way, we didn't mention that one. We mentioned ICBCH. Everybody's coming to Orlando except for those folks from Chicago. They are holdouts, and they are the Mid America Hypnosis Conference that is in October, and it's a really exciting one. So go to it. It's a little smaller, and yet it's not as small. We have in Florida the HEA. For those of you who are in Florida, that's a little smaller. But Mid America is a little bigger than that, and quite exciting,
And always attracts Michael Watson too. So that's a wonderful thing.
it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
We're very fortunate.
True enough. So
So, Carrie, did you have anything that you wanted to share about HypnoThoughts? What was your favorite, most impressive thing?
Well, that was my first time there, so I was overwhelmed. I was whelmed. I wasn't. It was great. It was really great. There was such diversity, and I sat there one night and somebody was saying, "Why do we call it HypnoThoughts?" And I thought, well, because there's the hypno stuff here, and then everything else is the thoughts, and there's so much. And there was the psychedelic therapy people there, and I had just applied to MAPS to become a trainer. And I thought, well, this is serendipity. Just everywhere I went, there was something I actually wanted to go to, and I couldn't because we had the panel, but it was recorded, so I could get that later. It was wonderful, except for the people who got COVID, and I'm knocking on wood because I haven't, but yeah, it was great.
I think one of the things that Carrie's saying is it can be overwhelming because it is so big. And let me fall back on IACT, which is a bit smaller, but still a family. The thing about it is you have a little more one-on-one time with everybody. I don't know about you, Carrie. I don't know about you, Michael, but I have talked to people since Vegas who I saw once on an elevator and not another time the entire week, right? And that's what happens in a place of that magnitude. You've got the diversity, you've got all sorts of options, and less one-on-one time. So the smaller conferences really are necessary. The kind of regional or more associated conferences are necessary so that we can have that more one-on-one time and more personalized learning, in my opinion. But I like to go to conferences because it's a great way to learn.
And in the interest of hypnosis history, I want to answer Carrie's implied question, and that is HypnoThoughts. Why is it HypnoThoughts? So for those of you who haven't been around, right after we got rid of the walkie-talkie and about the same time that we got cell phones and the internet, HypnoThoughts really started out as an online forum. And so it was thoughts about hypnosis, and people got together, and it grew to like 1,500 people or something almost overnight. It was just amazing how quick this forum caught on all over the world. Something that Scott Sandlin started, and at some point they said, well, hey, now that we're all hanging out together online, maybe some of us would like to get together for real. And so HypnoThoughts, that was just an online, literally an online forum, became the HypnoThoughts conference. That's the short version anyway. Yeah. So there you go.
Thank you for answering that. I was about to ask Patty about it because she was just saying earlier that she was there for the first and second years of the very, very, very early infant stages of it.
And before that, by the way, there was also something that Scott created that wasn't online. In fact, arguably the first online hypnosis conference that there was. I'm trying to remember what they called this, Hypnosis Summit or something like that. I did a presentation for it. They were all pre-recorded presentations in a really cool virtual atmosphere, and they tried everything. They tried to get the vendors in it. They tried, it was quite impressive for a first outing. And a year later, it was live. So yeah, there we are.
So, Patty, you opened your microphone momentarily. Did you want to say something about that?
Oh, no, I was just I already said, I went to the very first one, which was just as Michael said, we did the recordings, and they had little gathering rooms and, the tables, and it was impressive for those days. It's the first time I'd seen anything like that. It was a lot of fun. And the first one in Vegas was just small, I'm sure, compared to what it sounds like it is now, but this really, it's all good.
It
I
is good.
remember the first one in Vegas, Patty, seeing that you were really way up on the slot machines for a little while.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Until somebody walked by, I seem to remember. We had a table, remember, Michael? And we had the same experience that Karen just learned.
Yeah, yeah.
We decided we weren't going to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility. Who goes to a conference for responsibility, right?
All right. Well, anything further on that? Otherwise, I think it's about time.
One more little mention.
Yeah, go
Sherry
ahead.
Gilbert and I, Sherry runs the chapter in Arizona, and Sherry and I are working on a new project for metaphors, doing a full day or a 2-day workshop on the magic of metaphor, metaphor mania, we're going to call it, and have a lot of ways of talking to clients in metaphor, using metaphor, listening for how the client's using the metaphor, and eliciting their metaphors from them. It's going to be phenomenal. We've met a couple of times, and she's got a tree person house drawing thing that she does. Well, she did here on the chapter, that.
Yes, exactly.
And I've got a drawing exercise that I do. I took a tarot reading workshop, not because I did 2 days with Sean Carson, not because, as my husband fears, I'm going to open up a storefront with a neon sign in the front and become a fortune teller. That is not my intent at all. But I took the workshop because I know that there's a lot that you can tell from cards when you have someone focus on the card and say, okay, what do you see in that? They come up with a lot of their own metaphors. So it's just another way of eliciting client metaphors. So that's what our workshop is going to be about. It's going to be great. So that's coming up on World Hypnotism Day, January 4th. We will do a 1-hour presentation on metaphors. So I'll let you know all about that when we get all the time. But that's a sneak peek, sneak preview of what's going on.
January 4th. Yes, and by the way, and somewhere around that same date, by the way, there's going to be a virtual chapter. We always celebrate World Hypnotism Day, don't we? With oh no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about our holiday.
Yeah, you're thinking about the Christmas banquet.
At the same time, but yes, in fact, yeah, start looking forward to the holidays. I'm already thinking about this because we have like 15 speakers or something. Everybody's got about 7 minutes, and it's really a good, really good.
If you want to be an item on the banquet, let us know.
Yes.
We'd love to hear from you and what you want to present.
All right. Well, and by the way, we do know that Jen brings the food. She's already committed herself tonight by having dinner with us, and she's invited us to partake. So we'll do that. All right. Are we ready to talk about regression?
Yes, let's do it.
Regression and reimprinting was in my outline. By the way, I know the thing you set out didn't have that word in it, but that's kind of my thing, and in a way that I like to talk about along with regression, demystifying all of that, and so many other things. So maybe we just can just dive right in and talk about regression in the sense of this thing about youthening. Or however you think about it. I had an experience several years ago now where I went into the doctor's office, and it was a doctor that I wasn't familiar with, a new practice. And I was waiting in the examining room. They get you in there and then they leave you there for a half an hour while you're waiting to see if the doctor's going to come in. And there wasn't a regular chair in the room. So I was sitting on an examining table and my feet didn't reach the floor. Right? They were hanging over the edge of the chair and they didn't reach the floor. So I'm sitting there, I'm just kind of spacing out, waiting for the doctor. And after a little while, I noticed that my feet started to swing. A grown man sitting in the doctor's examining room, swinging my feet back and forth and feeling like I was 7 years old. And I think we have those kinds of experiences. So my first interest here is, where does this just sort of come up in nature before we talk about what hypnotists do and experiences that people have? I know a lot of folks will tell you, whenever I go to my parents' house, I feel like I'm a teenager again. Right. And so I'm curious to hear from anybody. And Karen, you probably got some thoughts about this as well. Certain situations that occur in life that naturally kind of bring this out of you. Do you have some stuff like that, or anybody?
Your parents' house, the doctor's office, those are good examples. It can also happen kind of when you're you don't even, it sneaks up on you. When I had my first book, Magic Words, I really had met at HypnoThoughts, had met the amigos, Sean and Sarah Carson and Jess Marion, and they have a table full of books, many books. And I looked at that and thought, that is my muse. I want that someday. And the next year I had my first book, and I went up to Sarah Carson, dear friend, and pulled up my book and said, I've got it, my first book. And she said, how old are you? And I went, 6. I knew instantly. And that was not the presentation of a full grown, mature woman, right? I spontaneously regressed because at some point I had that view of, I need your approval. I need my authority figure, my mother, whatever it is, approval, the empress, now that I have the tarot, approval, right? So that's how we automatically, just spontaneously do that. What about if you have a fear of spiders and you see one and you go all 3 years old because you know that you are way bigger and more powerful than that and smarter than the spider.
And notice, by the way, that some of them are the sort of delight that, as it's kind of interesting to me, by the way, the delight with your book, for example, those kind of things that I think as a it suggests to me that as grown-ups, we don't give ourselves permission to be delighted quite so easily, so in order to get that, it's something that's really sort of back, back there in our past. But similarly, there are some, being a child is a wonderful thing in many ways. It's also a really traumatic, challenging thing in a whole lot of ways, as you just mentioned, spiders, for instance, right? To regress to a frightened, freaked out 4-year-old can be a little, a little challenging. So a good thing, a bad thing, it is what it is. Anybody else have any spontaneous regressions that they'd like to share? Just, where you suddenly recognize that the experience you were having is one of a much younger you?
Alfred, if you'll unmute yourself and share.
Hey, I'm unmuted. A couple of weekends ago, I went to my 50th high school anniversary or reunion.
Yeah.
And it just felt like going back to high school. I haven't seen these people in 50 years, but that feeling of high school came back. And quite nice, actually. It was quite a fun time. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. See, now I went to my 50th reunion, and like a little kid, I wondered who are all these old people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt the same way. So I didn't age like some of them have. And I'm looking and saying, wow, there's a big difference between you and me. I stayed 18. You did not.
And the interesting thing is, we are all still 18 or whatever age it is in our mind, are we not? I hear people talk about working with children in their office or something like that. And I really think that everybody who comes in to see me is a child. They're all bringing their inner child in. And it's that inner child, I think, who is often looking for some sort of resolution or some sort of answer, that it may be the reason, the leverage to get them to call for help.
Yeah, well, in fact, we were talking about this with my group here last night, is that it's an interesting community of folks. So I just turned 72 weeks ago. I keep talking about it because it continues to surprise me. And what I noticed with the group that we were talking with is that many of them were close to my age. In fact, one guy was nearly 80, another woman like 67 or something like that. And we know people that are our age that are really old. We know people that are our age that well, I can't really get around like I used to, and all that stuff. And they sort of turn into that. Whereas what I noticed about my friends and the people that I was talking about is we're much more active and engaged. And I think people don't think of us as old people because we don't think of ourselves that way.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Patty, you had something to share. I'm sorry, Michael, did I cut you off?
What?
I asked Michael, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. Yeah, Patty, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
this just popped in my head, and wasn't thinking of this until somebody else said something, and it regressed me and made me remember that some of you know in the 1970s, I'm going to be 71 in October, by the way. So Michael, you're right behind me. I'll jump in. The water is great. In the 70s, I was in a band and I played keyboards. I played like synthesizers and organ. We had like stacked up keyboards. And I was just taught, you know, by people in the band. They taught me how to play that stuff. And I haven't played keyboards since the 70s, right? I can't sit down and play a piano. I'll hear songs every once in a while and my fingers will start moving. Now, it just occurred to me that is like a visceral muscle memory regression. And I'll go, oh my God, I remember exactly where my fingers went. I could sit and play that again, you know, and that's powerful. And it just occurred to me that's a whole different kind of regression.
And
It's the
here's
same
the
kind
thing
of thing as riding a bike. It comes back to you instantly, right? Yeah.
Here's the thing that's so cool about that, Patty, while you were sharing that, because I play keyboards as well. You know, and not, I shouldn't say as well, because I don't play them as well as you do, but I play keyboards. And as soon as you said this about being in a band in the 70s, I don't know why it was, but I heard the organ line from Light My Fire and my fingers started moving, you know, it's like, right. And I felt all of that. So just the suggestion, just mentioning it takes me to a place just you mentioning it takes me to a place inside of myself where, oh, I can relate to that too. And the next thing I know, I feel like I'm 17 again, you know, or 16 or whatever, you know, whatever I was when Jim Morrison and the gang did that. So that kind of leads us to where I think we're going, because here's the thing about Karen Hand that you may not know is she's absolutely, see, I'm like a technique guy. I do all kind of stuff, you know, and Karen just has this natural magic about how conversationally you can just make these things happen. So talk to us about that for a little bit, Karen.
I would love to, because I got to be honest with you. I went down the old school classic regression track first. I learned absolute classic regression, where you must do an element induction, get somebody into somnambulism, and then count them down, do an affect bridge or time date regression or whatever it is. And I followed all of the steps. I followed all of the steps until one day I forgot a step and it didn't matter. And then I went, oh, hold on, let's check on this. And then I realized that I had to think about when and why to do regression. The way I learned it was you do it every time for everything. And so being a good rule follower, when I first learned a rule, I did that until it was a terrible idea. And I learned instantly, no, you don't do it for everything all the time. There are times when you do regression and times when you don't. One of my absolute favorite times to do regression is for resources, just like we were doing a moment ago. Going back to playing the piano, if somebody wants confidence and I were working with Patty, I might ask her, when was the time you felt completely confident? And she might instantly go back to the band days and tell me about that and tell me more about that. And the telling of it, even Patty, let me ask, as you were telling us about the muscle memory and that kind of thing, were you not going deeper and deeper into the band trance?
Absolutely.
So tell me more about it. Tell me more about those band days.
Well, luckily, like you said, this is a good regression because those were such happy days. They were free. I was independent. I was making a lot of money, getting wild and crazy and just having a good time. So, you know, that comes back in as a resource of that you can still be safe and you can still have fun and have a good time, make a lot of money.
Right. And the more we talk about it, all I have to do is ask, and she starts talking about it, and to say, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. If we'd done this for a couple of minutes, Patty would have stopped talking in past tense. She would have been in it. She would have spontaneously started talking in present tense. It's a good clue that, okay, I don't know if you call that somnambulism or what you call it, but it's a good clue for me that they're in a trance. And so when I learned classic regression, I was told, never listen to the conscious mind. The client has no idea what they're talking about. Drop them into somnambulism and get to their subconscious mind because that's where all the work is. Well, Okay, I don't think that's bad advice necessarily, but it didn't work in my experience. And what I ferreted out and started experiencing was when first of all, I think it was the conscious mind who hired me. The conscious mind made the phone call. The conscious mind searched me out. The conscious mind pays me. I'm going to dance with the one that brung me. So I like to work with the conscious mind. And when a client comes in, I tell you, one of my favorite clients of all time was, I call him the fish guy. He called me one day and said, "Can you change taste buds?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I saw a stage hypnotist last night and he could change people's taste buds." And he said, they all had lollipops and they were enjoying them. And then he said, poof, and changed their taste buds and everything tasted like poo and they were spitting it all out. And I said, "Yo, wait a minute. Do you want me to change your taste buds so that everything tastes like poo?" And he said, "No, no, 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 no." He said, I'm Catholic and it's almost Lent and I hate fish. I'd really like to be able to enjoy fish for Lent." I said, "Sure, come on in. We can do that, no problem." What he told me then and there was if he experienced some hypnotic phenomenon, he would believe because he watched it happen in a stage show. Boy, I stuck that man's hand to his leg. We did all kinds of hypnotic phenomenon so that he got to experiencing hypnosis, and he knew right away. This particular client, not only did he tell me in the first call exactly what to do with him because he needed some of the magic to believe, but he said, "I know exactly when it started." That was his conscious mind. He walked in and said, "I know exactly when it started. Bing, 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 bing. I'm just going to go with that." Why would I break rapport and right away say, "Yeah, we're not going to worry about that. Let's go with that." And so they'll say, "I know exactly when it started." "Really? When?" "When I had to come home from school in grade school and my mother made me eat fish." And I said, "Really? Can you go back into that memory right now? Can you tell me more about that? Tell me about, be right there at the table and you're home from school." And he said, "Yeah, I am. And my brother's sitting right there next to me. And there they are, fish sticks on the plate. And I tasted one and it was just awful and I wouldn't eat it." "Excellent. And then what happened?" "Well, my mom came over and got the plate and gave me a cheese sandwich instead." I said, "Wait a minute. I thought you said that she made you eat that fish." "Well, no, I guess she really didn't." Now, this is conversation, and already the light bulb is going off for him because he changed his mind about the impression or the story he had been telling all of his time. That's in conversation. I just like to listen to my client and riff off what they say. Do you mind, Michael, if I throw up this handout that I was talking about real quick?
I don't mind it at all.
So this is kind of the way that I look at regression, when to do it, and why. So when I utilize regression, there we go. The way I see it, this is my BS, okay, my belief system only. If you like it, you can use it. If you don't like it, that's all right. Use your thing because I'm sure it's working for you. So I use age regression when, okay, I've got these letters up here in case you don't know, the ISE, the SSE, and the RSE. Some people say that you have to get back to the initial sensitizing event, the very first time it happened. That's what triggered it. And if you don't get to that, you can't find out anything. I honestly can't tell you about the fish guy. If that was his first negative experience with fish or any other kind of food he didn't like, all I know is he told me that he knew exactly when it started. And I said, "Great, let's go back there and see." So if it was the ISC, great. If it was the subsequent sensitizing event, another time, it doesn't matter. If a client doesn't necessarily remember the first time, but they remember the most recent time. I'm afraid of speaking in public. How do you know? "Well, the last time I did it." "Good. Tell me about that last time. Exactly what happened." So that's the recent sensitizing event. It doesn't matter to me what event we work with. It doesn't matter to me what event we work with because I believe that time travel goes both ways. If we can go all the way back to the initial sensitizing event and have it fix everything up to present time, it doesn't make any sense to me that time wouldn't travel in both directions. So if we do something and make a change, work with a trigger right at the recent sensitizing event, in my experience, it works just as well. So I'll do regression when the client says, "I know exactly when it started," when the client's physiology change, like when I said, I've got this book. So when they regress right there in front of you, which they sometimes will do, or when the emotion is really out of proportion to the event. Client said, there's a woman in my office. Every time I hear her voice, it just makes me crazy. My skin crawls. Okay, that's a little outsized to the event. So we might want to find out where that came from. Those are some times I know to do regression when I do it. The types of regression: daytime, to a specific day or time. The fish guy, go right back there to that kitchen table where you were having lunch. Affect bridge, I have a feeling. It makes my skin crawl. That feeling of being your skin crawl. Follow that back to the very first time. That is one way to do regression work. Symptom, I had this symptom. You can go back to when you first recognized that symptom or the cause. I have a thought. Some people say you can't work with a conscious mind. Yeah, I think something. Go back to the first time you had that thought. If that's the way the client's mind works and processes, why not utilize the way they do it rather than try to cram something down their throat? And there are lots of fancy words to get people into regression. Michael is a ritual guy, and I think Michael should definitely do ritual. I'm not a ritual guy, or gal for that matter. And guess what? Ritual folks won't necessarily like what I do. But people who aren't into ritual will like what I do, and I work with those people. And I want Michael to work with all of the others. But the point is, we can all do it different ways, and it still works. I like to do it quick. I like to do it quick and conversationally. I like to start a regression by saying something like, what does that remind you of? Oh, man, it reminds me of my dad. And great, okay, now we're off and running. If they'll be talking about a story, and have you ever experienced that before? Oh, yeah. Okay, in classic regression, that is the same thing as saying, is this new, or is this brand new, or have you done this before? Is this familiar or new? Is the classic way I learned it. It's the same kind of thing, except we're in conversation. And I guess I should say, my belief is we are always in a trance. So I don't have to do a lot to get my clients in a trance. They came into my office in a trance. It's my job to figure out what trance they're in, and if necessary, dehypnotize them from whatever trance they're running. So go back in time is another easy way to launch a regression. Be there now. Pretty easy. Remind yourself of another time that might have happened. Recall is a one-word regression. Patty, recall your favorite day with the band, that best performance, that way that you were on the stage and it was just the best ever. Does it come to you? Okay, so, and all I said was recall, and she's going right there. Now, I do future pacing. Remember, I said I think time travels both ways. I think it goes forward too, and it's really easy to future pace or look into the future by just saying imagine. Imagine, and then you go on, because that clears the conscious mind from having anything to worry about. Oh, this is just imagination, this is just play, so I can go any place. It's a great bypass of that critical faculty. And then, if going to get somebody into a regression, again, this is real kind of classic systems or pairing, but think about this as you're even doing it conversationally or however you're doing any kind of regression work. You don't want to, unless you're doing reimprinting, which Michael's going to get to in a moment, and this is very, very useful. I'm just talking about doing kind of regression to cause, or if we're looking for something like that. I like regression for resources more than this, but I want to tell you about this too. You want to keep yourself safe by building the gestalt, building the scene with a client. Tell me what's going on. Are you inside? Are you outside? Is it daytime, nighttime? Are you alone or with somebody? Are you standing, sitting? Whatever you want to do to help them build that scene in their mind. How old are you? They might tell you, I'm 4. I don't know. Do you have shoes on? What kind? No, my feet are bare. I'm laying down. I'm in a crib. Whatever, these kinds of questions can help them get to a place, but you're not telling them the place to go. For advancing the narrative, simply saying things like, what's going on? Tell me more. What happens next? Go on. Is there anything else I should know about that? Is there anything else we should look at here? Those are easy ways to not implant or install memories, but just to ask what's going on. Gathering insight, how does that make you feel? What does it make you think? Easy ways to get the client's view of what's going on. And if you're really hell bent on finding that ISE, you can ask, is it familiar or new? Has this ever happened to you before? And some people really want to get to that. And if you believe that, by all means, get to it. I'm just telling you that the way I have done it over time is to simply go with it conversationally, let it roll, and see what happens. And the client easily drifts off into a trance. I might have learned this first with my husband. It may just be me. But sometimes I can be talking to him and I'll just notice his eyes kind of glaze over. And I realize I've lost him and he's thinking about bowling, or he's thinking about something at work, or he's someplace else. And trust me, I do it too. We all do it. We go off into these little head trances. And I don't care what I am telling my client to do, or suggesting, or asking, or inviting them to do. They're going to do whatever they're going to do in their own head anyway. So I prefer just to help them regress or move forward or do whatever they're going to do while we're just talking about it. And then if we have to reinforce it later with something more formal, we can do that. Okay, so that's the look at classic regression that I wanted to share with you. And then we can kind of branch off from there and be flexible and do what works with the client.
Yeah, I want to start right with some things that you said, because first of all, there was so much in that, Karen, to unpack, and thank you for all of it.
I don't pack light, by the way.
By the way, so with mine, you know, the thing, I love that we've decided that I'm a ritual guy, right? So with mine, the way that it starts is after I light the candles and burn the incense and make the hexagram, right? No, nothing like that. So just to clarify that, I think when people come to a hypnotist expecting hypnosis, there's certain markers that they want to see. See, what I know behind that ritual is none of that is the important thing. I'm so in agreement with Karen. We just have to have a package, if you will, in which to present what it is that we're doing that's congruent with the client. So you know, I like to do it that way. But the thing that's interesting to me is hypnotists. I'm going to say this right online, right? Hypnotists have got more bullshit going on in their head than almost anybody else on the planet in terms of what we believe about what we do. And people will insist that they know that this is true because their teacher told them, and yet they have no evidence for almost 50% of those really strong statements that we like to make. One of them about this, you've got to get the initial sensitizing event. Neuroscience says what you've really got to do is you've got to light up the right circuitry. So you've got to get something that's connected to or associated, and the initial sensitizing event would do that. But there are a number of other examples that could do it as well. And we have this idea, some of us have this idea, until the light bulb goes off or on. Which way does it go, Karen?
Whichever way the client wants it to go.
It's a confusing metaphor, isn't it? Is that if you don't get the initial sensitizing event, are you ready for the next part? It's going to come back and get you later on. You know, you did the piece, your client left, they were great, and then you find out later, oh, I didn't get the original thing. So this initial sensitizing event is somehow going to haunt my client and create this problem later on. What an outrageous thing, as though a memory has volition, by the way. It's in there with the intention of getting you. You know, it's interesting, you know, it's an interesting premise. And I think very metaphysical, actually. And personally, I just don't buy it. I think if you have trouble getting on elevators and riding them up to the 10th floor, comfortably, and at the end of the session, you're able to do that easily, I don't think it really matters at all how it is that you got there, that you've allowed a person to have an experience and to reconsolidate it in such a way that it becomes available to them. And this is what happens in regression. We go back and we get a new perspective or a new understanding or a new thought about something. And consequently, we relate to that differently going forward. And so our lives are changed, not because we got the right one, not because, and I think you have to spin around in 7 circles and and face the east, and in my ritual, of course, right? To make sure if you don't do it right. Karen and I were talking about 6-step reframing. Some of you are familiar with this technique in NLP. John Grinder now calls it N-step reframing because he understands that we don't know how many steps there are. It depends on who's doing it, how you parse it, and all of that stuff. But there was a time when people were learning this technique and they thought, I've got to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this. And if I miss something, then, who knows, all hell is going to break loose. So, so it's kind of nice to know that what we're really finding out is we want people to have a movement in thought, a movement in perception, a movement with regard to how it is that they relate to this issue that they brought into therapy, and however you get them there. So I like to think of them not as steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, but I'd rather think of them as mile markers or certain things that may need to happen in that sequence of events. So like, let's watch for the next thing to unfold and the next thing to unfold, but not to get so rigid about the technique that you've forgotten that there's a human being in front of you who's going through some changes, and maybe the best thing that you can do is just guide them to a better place. I see your hand, Don, and in fact, go ahead, open up your microphone and talk to us.
So there's find the cause and fix it school, which a lot of hypnotists, that's, you have to find the ISE. And I think a lot of psychotherapists work that way too. They'll argue, they'll say, well, if you don't find the cause, how do you expect to fix the problem?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I find it's the opposite. So a couple of years ago, this woman comes into my office. She says, I haven't slept in 20 years. I said, okay. And so, we went to work. I did a number of things with her. I did core transformation. I did wholeness, maybe some other things. Some techniques to help her sleep, self-hypnosis. And after 2 or 3 sessions, she was sleeping pretty well. She comes in for the next session and she says, I remember what happened. I said, oh, tell me. She tells me about 20 years before, she had been engaged to this guy. And on the day of their wedding, he walked out. She says, I went over to my girlfriend's house and I said to myself, if I don't go to sleep, it won't be over. Okay, so we found the purported initial sensitizing event, but this came after we had largely resolved the issue. It was kind of icing on the cake, you could say.
Yeah.
And she couldn't, she hadn't remembered that before. She would have come into my office saying, this thing happened to me 20 years ago, and I haven't been able to sleep since. Mm-hmm. But as we resolved the problem, she remembered it.
Yeah.
So it can happen. It's kind of like what you were saying. Once those neurons or those circuits had been readjusted, it all came back to her.
Yeah. And it isn't just hypnotists that have this idea that you've got to get the initial sensitizing event in order to make the change. I think that popular psychology has put this idea out, and maybe in movies or maybe on Dr. Phil. I don't know where people learn their stuff, but I think a lot of people believe this, as though there's, and this is the biggest myth that I can think of. We've got this idea, or we have, and some of us have taught this idea to people, that if you find the place where it started, it will go away. Now, I'll tell you what, first of all, a whole lot of people know where it started. We mentioned this earlier. They'll come in and say, I know exactly, it started when my mom made me eat fish, or whatever else. They already have some idea, and it may be, and the ritual guy in me is responding to this part, it may be that what they need in order to satisfy themselves and let it go is to do it this way because they believe that that's what's going to work. So the belief itself can make that ritual efficacious. But here's the thing, everybody, I'm stuttering for a minute because I don't know where to go with this. Hypnosis is something that has been defined in a million different ways, you know. And one of the most popular definitions, at least, has to do with this concentration and focus of attention. Okay. When a client comes into your office and all hell is breaking loose in their life, which is why they've come to see you, I have a feeling that they're pretty much engaged in something that is all consuming as they're talking to you about it. They're doing their own regression, by the way. They're sitting there in front of you. They're telling you about what's going on in their household, and they're moving themselves into that situation. They're having an experience. They're hypnotizing themselves. They're already in trance. That's really kind of useful to realize that the memory is the induction, because if you really let them go there, you know, and maybe go through it. So if my client comes in and they're deeply upset about something and possibly on the verge of this thing called abreaction that we might get to in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask them, where do you feel that in your body? They'll say, well, I feel it right here in my chest, for example. So then I might turn that into the induction very easily by saying, so just put your hands there for a moment, just to sort of stabilize that and really pay attention. And I'd like you to just focus on that area and ask a question. I'm just going to do something that provokes a response. The way that Karen was talking earlier about using metaphors to elicit things, I want to just take advantage of something that's there and say, what can you tell me by virtue of focusing on that, and see what comes from my client? And I'm gonna follow that. And I trust that so much more than anything that I might make up, because I'm not, you know, I'm not the person. There was a guy, there's a guy in England that was in a class that I taught a bunch of years ago. And I used to do, I was training for an NLP institute there, and it was a master practitioner class. And in this master practitioner class, the module I was teaching was about using hypnosis for modeling excellence from somebody. And of course, as you might expect, the first day that I was there to do this, somebody ran up to me and said, I want you to turn me into Milton Erickson. That's great. I did point out to them that Milton Erickson was dead, so they should really think about what they're asking for. But okay, we'll turn you into Milton Erickson. So we did this thing, you know, and I asked him as Milton Erickson to talk to the room for a minute, and these master practitioners, and he talked to them for a while. It was very, very cryptic. Cryptic enough that I don't think that even Milton would have understood, but the guy had a hell of an inner experience of it anyway. When he came out, he said, my gosh, Michael, he says, I'll never do hypnosis the same way again. And I'm like, well, what happened? And he said, when I looked at the room, I realized that everybody in the room was already in a trance. I think that's a really interesting thing to consider. If you've got a client who has come to you in a therapeutic setting for the purpose of focusing in on something that's really significant in your life, in their life rather, they're going to be, you know, they're going to be really engaged. And it just might be that this thing that we call depth of trance in hypnosis is something that Michael Watson at least refers to as degree of engagement. There's some things that you really get into, you know, in the vernacular, and I think that's kind of what we're going for. So the point is, rather than struggling with some arcane technique and going, we've got to do this exactly this way, the question is, how can I get you more connected to your experience so that we can find out what's going on in there? Some people have the idea, though, as soon as they find out what it was, that it's going to go away. Some other people will come to me and say, Michael, and you're going to have to pardon my language because I have to say it this way. They say, Michael, I want you to hypnotize me so that I can find out how come I'm so fucked up. Well, I'll tell you what, if you could find out how come you are so fucked up, would that help you, or would that give you an explanation that sort of just that then people say, oh gosh, no wonder my life is such a mess because this happened to me. Nothing is resolved there. In fact, the thing that they're trying to change now becomes further justified because of their history. So it's really an interesting thing to me about, do you really want that? Or do you want to figure out or move through a session to a place where you now have a different way to relate to the experience that you're trying to change. So, so it will be different from you, whether it comes from your past or whether it's just some philosophical thing that you've got going on about speaking in public, or whether you can stop smoking or whatever. But as soon as we tell our client, this must have come from my past, then what we've got is a smoking client searching through their history to figure out, where is it that I find myself unable to control my behavior around a certain thing. Now, I don't know why you would want to bring that into a therapeutic session about smoking, because now suddenly the problem is going to be much more difficult. Some of us have this experience where a client comes in with one problem and they leave with 6, because you've done such a thorough job. So there's my thoughts.
Michael, when it comes to smoking, I do a little bit different kind of time travel. And I think we all know the fork in the road metaphor. You've come to a fork in the road, you've got a decision to make. On the left side, you can go making no changes through life. And on the right side, you make the changes you need for a better life. Let's try them out. Let's take that low do nothing road. Let's go 1 year into the future. Let's go 2 years in the future. Let's go 3 years into the future and rub their nose kind of into all the things and make all the things worse. I guess it may be guided visualization or whatever it is, but making all of that scenario worse with all of the things they told you they hate about it. And then bring them all the way back to the fork in the road and let's try out that other one. Let's go a year, 5 years, 10 years into your future, making this change, looking back down that road, knowing that's something that you used to do. It's just nostalgia. It's not something you do anymore. That too is time travel, right? That is future pacing, and it's doing the same kind of look at what's going to happen. And asking or inviting the client to do their own work. If you don't make any changes in a year, what's going to be different? More holes in the shirt, right? More yellow on your hands, whatever it is they hated. And in a year, when you do the things that need to be done, what's going to happen? Oh man, you're walking up that hill and your breathing is good. Your heart's not beating fast, or all of those things. And that too is time travel and a way to make change, which brings us, Michael, to how does all of this actually make change? Memory reconsolidation.
Yeah. Well, so the discovery, by the way, I think that there is, and this is right in the middle of what you said a second ago. I wrote this down. There is another way to experience this. What is the message that we want to give our clients? They're going, when I stand in front of an audience to speak in public, I'm petrified. I had a guy once, oh my God, this was just the coolest thing. He told me, I'm terrified of public speaking. I am too, by the way. He told me, I'm terrified of public speaking. And I said, well, what's it like when you're standing in front of an audience? And he says, I look out at the room and all I see are eyes looking at me, and I thought, well, that's pretty scary. He said, yes, and ready? Yes, and they're pulsing. I'm like, well, Jesus Christ, pardon me, but if that doesn't scare the hell out of you, you need a psychiatrist.
And if that isn't a trance, what is?
Sure.
And remembering to go into that trance every time you stand up in front of people is a skill. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, you remember to do that every single time?
Yeah. That's Virginia Satir. My favorite line with Virginia Satir and people with a person with an elevator phobia, and they get phobic when they get in an elevator. She says, "Oh my gosh, most people aren't nearly that consistent." She says, that's just amazing. Yeah. So yeah. But the ultimate message, isn't it, is that there is another way to experience this. That's what reconsolidation is. Reconsolidation is you sort of take the situation as it is, you take it apart, you put it back together in another way, and you put it back in. You have made it solid again. You have reconsolidated it and made it into a new thing in a different arrangement with a different perspective. And then it becomes something different. I had difficult experiences as a kid with my father, a rather challenging relationship. And without getting into all the long story about this, but I was in an exercise in a personal growth training, a bunch of years ago, whose 3-letter name we will not mention. But in this particular training, we were talking about holes in communication and people we needed to talk to. And I ended up being sort of forced by the by the cattle therapy that I was in to call my father and share my that I loved him and all this stuff. So I had this conversation with my dad. It wasn't bad. He was completely surprised by it, and I didn't want to risk the emotional upheaval that would come from him telling me, well, that was a bunch of bullshit or something. So what I said to him, in fact, was that I loved him and I wanted him to know that I knew that he had always loved me. I just completely let him off the hook, right? That I knew that he had always loved me. And, he proceeded to respond to that. My father was a joker with other people. I mean, he was trouble, but he also had a joke about just about everything. So his response to this was, he says, I heard a good one the other day. He says, what do you call a mountain climber, an impotent mountain climber? I'm like, I don't know. What do you call an impotent mountain climber? And my dad said, dry sack on the rocks, which is liquor. Some of you will remember there was a product. So, and I'm like, okay. So my father's response to this conversation about loving one another was to tell me a joke about impotence. I thought that was really rather telling and a very powerful thing for him to do without realizing at all that he was doing it. And I came to understand something from him that day about who he was and how difficult some of these things were for him. So in the future, from that day going forward, I always had a different feeling about my relationship with my dad because I understood something I never knew before. And that was that he was actually doing the best that he was capable of. Might not have been what I wanted, but he was doing the best that he was capable of. It revolutionized my relationship with my dad. It could have happened it happened in a conversation. And it was about just a shift in perspective where this thing used to look one way. Now I understand it differently. And I think that's what reconsolidation does.
And that too was spontaneous inner child work.
Yeah.
Because all of that old stuff that went on with your dad was gone in a flash.
Yeah. And the joke was 5th grade, wasn't it? Yeah, exactly.
And so the memory then became different for you. I've heard it described, I believe Melissa Tiers describes it this way, that, and boy, if I'm misquoting, I'm sorry. The memories kind of rise up out, and every time you tell something or talk about it or have it, it gets inputted with reactions and what other people say. And if somebody says, I don't remember it that way, or it didn't happen, oh my God, that's horrible. Whatever those reactions are, all get mixed up with it. And then it all goes back in and resettles in overnight and forms a brand new memory. Well, if it can happen that way as things, deteriorate or get worse, or why can't it happen just like that when things get better? Oh, I've got this new information. Well, that changes everything.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah. A really useful question, I think, to ask ourselves whenever we're challenged is, what else could this mean? Because somewhere we're coming to some conclusion. We're coming to some understanding about this means this. The fact that my father is the way that he is means he doesn't love me. And by the way, and the fact that he doesn't love me means that I'm not going to grow up normally, and that means, and that means, and that means, and that means. And you can break that chain really early, when you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe it means something else. Maybe there's something different going on here.
So let's take a moment to talk about the darker side of regression work. Those nasty ab reactions and false implanted memories and things like that. I had a question from a chapter attendee who said she couldn't make it tonight, but she was curious about something. And if she were here, she would ask about that movie Hypnotic. Have you guys seen that Netflix movie Hypnotic? Right? If you haven't, check it out. It's a very creepy movie. But it's also hopeful. It's also hopeful. The whole movie is about a hypnotist who kind of takes over a woman's mind and implants all sorts of memories about his past into her. I have a real hard time believing that I'm going to implant any of my past memories into anybody else. I don't care how skilled I am. So that I found. But hypnosis is often used as that dose machina, where it's the thing that makes everything happen. And that's okay with me. The interesting thing about the movie, by the way, if anybody asks you about it, is when push came to shove, at the very end, she is able to overcome all suggestions and take care of herself. And that's really, I think, the way suggestions work is they last. They're good as long as they're good. They last as long as they last. And when they're not good anymore, they can be dropped. After all, the spider phobia was probably a suggestion for somebody from somebody when you were 3 or 4 or 5, right? And that's lasted all that time until you come in and say, I can't have this in my head anymore, and now we change it. So the suggestion lasted as long as it lasted. But
Don't go in there. There's spiders in there.
right. So can that kind of thing happen, Michael, where somebody takes over somebody else's mind and makes them think a new thing that didn't actually happen?
Only because you said can, and I'm a possibility thinker. I'd like to believe that maybe you can, maybe anything can. However, I don't think it does. I don't think it does nearly, I should say it another way, not nearly as often as we think so. But it does depend, doesn't it, on how impressive the communication that put it in place is in the first place. You know, how there are some things that we're exposed to something happens, we form a belief, and we carry that belief with us for the rest of our lives. That doesn't require hypnosis, by the way. It just requires living in a world, you know, and thinking. So I don't want to, hypnosis gets branded with this kind of stuff, and it's a little problematic. The hypnotic book, the story that you're talking about, by the way, if it's in a book as well, and I think it might have been a book to turn to a movie. It's probably in the fiction department of the library.
Oh yeah.
You know, and
Horror,
so many of
horror.
these stories. You know, here's the thing that a bunch of years ago, there was a woman named Sybil, you know, who went to her psychotherapist, and the next thing you know, there was a book and a movie. And by the way, and subsequent to that book and movie, the incidence of multiple personality disorder went from practically zero to all over the place, because people now had this idea that, oh, guess what? We found a new way to be crazy. You know, and some folks really took to it, and some folks were very, very good at it. But the thing is with Sybil, if you don't know this, by the way, it was debunked later on. What actually happened was this client went to her psychotherapist one day, and they were talking about something that had happened in her life. And she says, you know, I just really wasn't feeling myself that day. And the therapist said, oh, that's very interesting. You know, who she said, I didn't feel like myself. That's what. And then the therapist said, well, who did you feel like? And they started creating this thing, and they were just doing it as an exercise. But they continued doing it for a little while longer, and they thought that this was really interesting. And these two women conspired to write a book about something that never even happened, that became a bestseller and became a great movie, and that literally planted the seed for multiple personality disorder in all kinds of folks on the planet, where therapists were not seeing that, at least at that level and with that frequency before. Go ahead.
You said something in there that I thought was very telling. And you said, after this came out, people looked at it and said, oh, we found a whole new way to be crazy. I think change requires leverage. And I don't think anybody who didn't want to have this disorder or be in that club, so to speak, took that suggestion. But somebody who might have wanted an excuse or some club to belong to or some difference might easily take that suggestion.
Yeah.
But I think that they have to be in the trance of acceptance first. I mean, a cult leader, a gang leader, never walks up to the strongest guy on the street and tries to convert him. They look at the lonely kid, and they might walk up and, as one would in reading a client, right? They might walk up to them and say, oh, could you use a friend? Oh, come over to my house for dinner tonight. Oh, why don't you stay over? I mean, that's how the hypnosis is deepened and the trance is deepened. But it has to start from somebody who's in the trance of, I don't want to say vulnerability, but trance of acceptance first.
Yeah. Now,
In my
I'm sorry. I want to be careful that you don't get the impression, or that nobody gets the impression that I said that there is no such thing as multiple personality disorder, because I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that when it became a popular idea, it also became a popular experience among patients in psychotherapy in ways that it had not before. Not only is it a new way to be crazy, but it's a new and rather creative way to be crazy. You know, you can come up with as many variations as you need to, as many as 24 or however many, however many Sybil had. Now we talk about parts, right? And this is the language of NLP and things. We use this kind of references all the time. I know we were talking earlier about me going into the doctor's office and discovering that I was suddenly 7 years old. Now, but if we really want to institutionalize that into something that, oh gosh, there's this 7-year-old that's going to pop out anytime at a moment's notice and and create havoc in your life, then it's going to be a disorder. Otherwise, it was simply a pleasant distraction, and okay, or a thought of the moment.
Michael, I don't mean to get us off the rails here or jump subjects, but we're getting pretty close to the end, and I really don't want to cheat re-imprinting because it's such a valuable tool and you are so good at it. So I want to make sure that you have time to explain re-imprinting, and then if we have time at the end, we can take more questions or do something like that.
Okay. So obviously we've have only 12 minutes left. So this is the truncated version. But basically, some of you are familiar with a fellow named Konrad Lorenz. I'm not going to spend too much time on him other than 2 sentences or 3 sentences, but he did some experiments with ducklings and stuff. And they discovered that when ducklings hatched, they looked for the first thing that moved and they followed it around and identified it as mother. Konrad Lorenz in his laboratory discovered that at night, the little ducklings would run around the place and they would curl up around his shoes to sleep for the night because of that. So this is an imprint in biology. Okay, the same thing that happens to us. We have experiences in our life. We form conclusions about them. And I want to remind everybody, whenever I say the word conclusion, I want you to hear very carefully what this word means in English. It means we stop. It means we stop thinking. We come to some place where something happens. We form an opinion about it. And we go, that's the way that it is. Okay, that's an oversimplified description of what an imprint is. So people have these experiences. It's what we go looking for, original cause and all that stuff, in order to sort out in most approaches to psychology. But reimprinting is a little bit different because imprints come to us typically from our parents. There are other examples. They may be school teachers, people of some significance that we believe have some authority or understanding about life. And as kids, we grab them up and we take them on. So one day, Robert Dilts, some of you know these characters, a great trainer in neurolinguistic programming. Robert Dilts was working with a client in the front of a training room, a student in the front of a training room, actually, talking about something that had happened in her childhood. And standing in the back of the training room, this is just one of my favorite NLP memories, was none other than Timothy Leary, the LSD guru that everybody is familiar with, and a great researcher in consciousness. So Leary's watching Robert Dilts do this demonstration. And the woman that he's doing the demonstration with is describing a situation with her mother in which she says, and she's choking me. You see this gesture here. I don't know if I need to turn sideways. She's choking me. Okay. Well, there's something very interesting, and Robert almost missed it. And he was starting to go along with the story, and Larry's waving his hands around to stop him and to get his attention to this. Because notice, she didn't say, she's choking me. She said, she's choking me. So there's an interesting question that says, right now, when I've got my hands like this, am I the child or am I the mother? So it suggests that in this imprint, there's some kind of internalization of the mother. And so what NLP contributed to this, and Robert Dilts in particular contributed to this, and with Tim's prodding, was the notion that there is a mother who in that situation would have responded differently if she had been more resourceful. This is the way that NLP goes all the time. What, what's the positive intention, and was mom missing some resources? Typically, we go back in regression, we look at the past, we might do some informed child technique, and stuff like that. And we get the child to have a different experience. But it is suggested that in the imprint, one of the things that we need to do is we need to give that mother more resources. I've asked clients myself, I've said, if your mother were here, or if we could call her on the phone right now and tell her, that we were talking about this thing that had happened when you were 7. And we wonder if on that particular day, the reason that you did what you did is that you wanted your child, 30 years later to be in psychotherapy, working through these issues. The mother would say, well, of course not. Right? Of course. Of course, the mother would say, of course not. The mother was not intending to do any damage to this child. The mother was lacking resources. She was at her wit's end. In fact, in this particular case that I'm thinking of, she was working 3 jobs and she was a single mother, and et cetera, et cetera. So what we do is we give resources to the mother first, and we let the person look at that in a new way, with the mother being more resourceful. The situation just won't go the way that it does, and that softens the imprint. Because the way we know that there was an imprint in the first place is this child had come to a conclusion, had formed a belief about their worthiness in life, or whatever it is. Okay. Now we're going to give mom a little more resources and see that differently, and then notice what beliefs would that child have come through with if the mother had been that way. Because what this does is it immediately begins to change the nature of reality. It says, oh, wait, what's true is only what's true because of the way that you experienced it. And if something had happened differently, what's true would have been different. So these conclusions that we've come to are interesting artifacts of a particular moment of unresourceful behavior. So when we come to understand that, then what we do is we give the child resources, much as you might do in an informed child technique. And we have them witness that experience from a dissociated perspective, witness that experience again, but with the child now being more resourceful and having a different way to think about this. And the child with the mother that was working 3 jobs, in fact, came to understand that, oh my God, my poor mother was just so desperately trying to get a little bit of break time, and an overzealous, 4-year-old, just really wasn't giving her that. And that's what happened. But it isn't about my worthiness in life or my mother being a good person or anything. It's a moment in history. So now what there is a whole new perspective, and the opportunity then to say, so what now can you come to believe about that situation? And that new belief is something that you can carry forward. And then that's really what we're going for. So again, reconsolidation, taking the thing apart, putting it together in a different way, forming a new understanding about it, and now able to then move into the future with a different understanding. Much like the change in my thing with my dad. That was pretty fast, Karen.
It really was. And it's a very elegant way of doing forgiveness work as well, because it's what happens. You start forgiving the other person because you see that they had flaws, and you start forgiving yourself at the same time. It's just a very elegant, beautiful way of doing it. I learned a little meaner kind of forgiveness process where you beat a pillow and you get all of the anger out of you, and you confront that mother and you tell them everything they did to hurt you, and then you let them say why they were that way. And then they start picking apart, like, oh yeah, she didn't learn love at home, and blah, blah, blah. That is just a meaner way of doing the exact same thing that is more positive and beautiful and elegant in that reimprinting.
Beating a pillow is really getting down, isn't it?
Yeah, okay. Here's the thing. I was taught that, yes, you must have them beat the pillow. Take all of that anger to your shoulder and then let it all out like you're pumping water.
Yeah.
And I had only one client when I was doing the beat the pillow thing. because I thought I was supposed to. I had only one client who had that much rage, that much anger. You know, if they were upset with their mother, they didn't want to hit their mother. They wanted it to change, but they didn't ever necessarily want to beat their husband in the head or whatever it was. So that just seemed like a really mean thing to bring to the fore, or even to put in there, that you need to pound that out. What you also covertly teach with the reimprinting is, and empowers the client to do it the next time.
Mhm. Yeah,
Wow, this came up. I wonder what would have happened if they'd been different.
there is another way to experience this. There's another way to think about this. The ultimate message.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm glad we had the time for that.
Yeah.
We have about 4 minutes. Does anybody have a pressing question or want to share a pressing thought?
Well, just a quick thing, nothing earth-shaking, but when I was around 4, I used to cut things out with my mother. I don't know if they were paper dolls or what. And my mother was very good at it. I mean, she could cut, along the lines, and I had trouble doing that.
Yeah.
And at a certain point as an adult, I looked back on it and I said, I was 4. Of course, I didn't have the motor skills that my grown-up mother did. That was kind of a nice, interesting thing to realize.
Yeah. And
I'd always thought she was good at scissors.
Yeah.
She wasn't particularly good at scissors. I was 4 years old.
And by the way, so that little flash of enlightenment, Don, how did that come to you? What even brought that up?
I don't
you
know.
have to be hypnotized, did you?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about it one day.
Yeah. Yeah. What a lovely thing.
People do their own work all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, if you, and I often tell my clients, and if you want to go ahead and do this even faster, you want to go ahead and do your own work, I certainly wouldn't stop you. Because they're going to do it anyway.
But I wouldn't stop you, but do leave your credit card before you go.
Oh, they pay ahead of time. They pay up front.
Yeah, great. Well, gosh, what a wonderful evening this has been, and how quickly it has gone. Oh, Jennifer, I see that your microphone is unmuted. I have a feeling you might want to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I was along the lines of what you all were talking about. I was talking to a girlfriend that I haven't seen, that I grew up with, and she called me about Olivia Newton-John, and it was reminding me we used to sit in the bedroom and sing Grease songs at the top of our lungs, and it was a really lovely memory of that. And then we ended up talking for a couple of hours about all these different memories, and we remembered them so differently. It was, she goes, oh, I forgot that happened, and I forgot that happened, and it's really interesting how you know, we're in the same place, but you remember things so differently.
Mhm.
And I think opening up that curiosity, you know, Karen, what you were saying, people do their own work, but sometimes they're stuck in their day-to-day and their, you know, obviously the brain. And so just by having conversations with our friends or that kind of thing, you know, they go, oh, I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, that did happen. And it ended up being a really lovely, you know, conversation with her. And yeah, so that was my experience yesterday.
There was something I saw on television earlier today, as a matter of fact, and it was a character in a drama that had some drama going on, because it was a drama. And it was a particularly bad day, but she went to work anyway, because she said she didn't want to be alone with her thoughts. It's an interesting thing to consider. That is, we are, and I talk about this, I can't talk without talking about this. We are running on a sea of thought, you know, and if you're in there describing the world to yourself in a particular way, it's interesting to notice when the talk about Olivia Newton-John comes up, for instance. It takes you to a bunch of memories, to a bunch of interesting things, and then you have an experience out of those. We really are driving this bus. You can choose the content of your thinking, and I know people don't really readily believe this, but every once in a while, if you get yourself really stuck, don't be alone with your thoughts. Find out what happens if you do something different, if you go somewhere else. Watch the Three Stooges, for goodness sake, you know, and notice what happens. because we really have more control than we give ourselves credit for. And I think we've been sold a lie by the therapeutic community very often, in that we need so much more work and struggle to get through things than really is necessary. My opinion.
Jennifer, you said that people do their own work, and they do their own work all the time, but sometimes, just like you said, they're stuck and they need a professional. And that's what we're trained to do, to get them out of that trance that traps them and help them create a better trance for themselves.
Professional help.
Professional help. There you go. And we've come to the end of our time.
Yeah.
It's been lovely. Thank you guys for sharing and joining us on this.
Do come back and see us a month from now, of course, and we'll look forward to it.
And grab your CEUs.
Grab your
Is this
CEU.
where we, is this where we get to open up the mics and say thank you?
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
thank you, great presenters.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
for
Nice to
joining.
see you guys.
See you next
Thank
month.
you, everybody.
Tried it.
Have a great month.
Next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.